Crick. In 1952, the British government declared a state of emergency in the colony of Kenya under the leadership of Governor Sir Evelyn Baring. Crick. Times were perilous, for you see, Europeans had been killed in the highlands by a sect known as the Mau Mau. The Mau Mau stood for Mzungu aende Ulaya, Mwafrika apate uhuru. Crick. And so in a bid to quell this rising sect, the British government declared that there shall be no movement past certain times, and a state of emergency was declared. Times were tough, and there was tension between the black man and the white man. Crick. This is a story of a man who lived in those days in Kenya's history. If he were here today, he would be more than 97 years old, and he would constantly remember the pains of the agony of those days as if it was only yesterday. Crick. His name was Hussein Warutere. Hussein Warutere was a rickshaw driver between the Norfolk Hotel and the Railways restaurant. He used to ply the route that we now know today as Moi Avenue. Crick. And Hussein Warutere made his living by ferrying people from the Norfolk Hotel to the Railways restaurant or the other way around, and he would ride on this rickshaw and he would be paid a penny for each trip. Crick. On this particular day, Hussein had made quite some progress. You see, it was lunchtime and he had already made 20 trips. He was feeling lucky that day. So Hussein Warutere, for his afternoon siesta, went and sat underneath a tree by the Norfolk Hotel and was accompanied by his best friend, Wamboye, who brought some snacks from his wife for them to enjoy. Crick. The two friends ate the meal, and when they were done, they sat underneath the Norfolk Hotel tree, waiting for the afternoon shift as they took their siesta. But then suddenly, ladies and gentlemen, Hussein Warutere was awakened by the sudden, urgent need to use the toilet. Crick. His stomach growled. He awoke with a start. He clutched it, and he knew he needed to use the toilet before he went for his afternoon shift. He looked around and he saw a toilet. He began to rush to it when the most unfortunate thing happened. Out of the Norfolk Hotel stepped out Corporal Frederick Marshall, a ruthless police reservist, a white man who was notorious for killing Africans on a whim. Corporal Frederick Marshall saw Hussein Warutere's rickshaw, and he was in need to go down to the Railways restaurant to have his lunch. And so he saw Hussein in the distance and said, "Oi, take me to the railway station, haste." Crick. In those days, it was illegal for a black man to ignore the call of a white man for any reason whatsoever. In light of the emergency, you would be seen to be defying the white man's rule. And anyone who was caught defying the white man's rule or supporting the Mau Mau was either arrested, beaten up, or at times taken to a detainment camp. So Hussein Warutere, for the sake of his own safety, postponed his need to use the toilet and rushed, picked up the rickshaw, waited for Corporal Frederick Marshall to get in, and he began to ferry him down to the Railways restaurant from the Norfolk Hotel. Crick. Hussein Warutere ran until he arrived at the Railways restaurant. Now, ladies and gentlemen, have you ever had a bad stomach? Have you? Yes. Find out from the person seated next to you, have you ever had a bad stomach? Crick. Crick. Now, if you've ever had a bad stomach, you know you don't need to be shaking it up the way Hussein was shaking it up. By the time he got to the Railways restaurant, the situation in his stomach was pretty serious, evident by the tiny bursts of air coming here and there, like a little volcano threatening to erupt. Ooh, Hussein needed to use the toilet. And so he turned to his customer to receive the payment for the trip. Would you believe it? Corporal Frederick Marshall stood there the whole time, holding Hussein Warutere's payment, a mere penny, ladies and gentlemen, while talking to another white man. Now, in those days, it was illegal to interrupt the conversation of two white men, unless it was to save their lives. Creek. A good African like Hussein Warutere was to remain perfectly still and not draw any attention to himself. And so there he stood, looking at Marshall, waiting for the payment. Meanwhile, how he called upon his gods. He called upon Mwenenyaga. Oh, that you just strike. He called upon the Islamic God. Just strike Marshall to just stop talking. Crick. And when Marshall was done, he leisurely turned and he handed Hussein his coveted coin. Hussein grabbed the coin, shoved it in his pocket, parked his rickshaw on the side, and was about to look for the nearest toilet when suddenly Marshall called out to him and said, "Oi! Have you seen David Banks?" Hussein turned. Who? You know, David Banks, his wife and I love going for safari together. And we saw a few lions the other day, and you know, it was magnificent, lovely, lovely, lovely. And you know, David Banks, no! Shouted Hussein Warutere. In those days, it was illegal to raise your voice at a white man. Corporal Frederick Marshall stared at Hussein, wiped the saliva off his face, and asked him, "What did you say to me, boy?" Hussein fawned and said, "I meant, no, sir." And Marshall dismissed him. And as soon as Marshall dismissed him, Hussein Warutere packed his rickshaw and began looking for the nearest toilet. He looked left, right, center. Right there in the center of his view, Hussein Warutere saw a sign that said, "Toilets." Crick. He began to rush towards them, and he saw another sign that said, "Ladies and gents." Crick. And he began to rush toward the toilet, and he saw a smaller sign that said, "Whites only." Hussein Warutere looked around. He looked around. He didn't care. He ran into the toilet, passed Mwethaga, the toilet cleaner, ran into that toilet, locked himself, lashed it closed, sat on that toilet, relieved himself, and life made sense. Click. Mwethaga, the toilet cleaner, came knocking. Hey, Hussein Warutere, wait. Hii ni choo ya wazungu. Unafanya nini hapo? Hii ni choo ya wazungu. And then Mwethaga went silent. Hussein didn't care. He was done with his business. He unlatched the door and then came face to face, not with Mwethaga, the toilet cleaner. He came face to face with a white man. Not just any white man. Corporal Frederick Marshall. Crick. Marshall stared at Hussein, sized him up. Hussein, afraid, his lips quivering. And then Marshall pushed Hussein out of the way, got into the toilet, for you see, he too was very, very pressed. Crick. Hussein Warutere grabbed his rickshaw and left Nairobi not to be seen for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And when he felt the coastline was clear, he snuck back into the city, grabbed his rickshaw, and resumed his business. But 3 days after resuming his business, Hussein Warutere was summoned at what we now know as Central Police Station. Crick. And there he found that Corporal Frederick Marshall had actually accounted for a crime that Hussein Warutere had committed. A report was made. Hussein Warutere was frog-marched to the law courts, and there at the law courts, Hussein Warutere had the judge say, "Hussein Warutere, you are hereby convicted of the following crimes. Number 1, assisting the Mau Mau. Number 2, resisting the white man's rule. And number 3, trying to plant a bomb in the white man's toilet. Hussein Warutere had all these trumped up charges and said, Guy, what did you get in the bomb? Crick, Hussein Warutere was convicted and sentenced to 13 years in prison. He served 7 years in Manyani prison and 6 years in Wea Tabere prison. Friends, this is a true story. It's a true story from our history, and you can find it in Al Kagg's book, Living Memories. Why don't you find out from the person seated next to you how many commandments were broken in that story?